Welcome back, everybody, to Titans of Today, episode 59. We have Itamar Novick. He is the general partner of Recursive Ventures and an entrepreneur for almost 25 years. Itamar, welcome to the show.
Jacob, thank you for having me. Very excited to be here today. And thanks for everybody that's listening. I don't know if I'm a Titan. I feel like I'm more of a David in the David and Goliath equation. Super excited to be here and be a Titan.
Yeah, definitely. I have the book Titan here. Have you ever heard of it?
Nope.
So it was about the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Jay Goulds of the 20th century entrepreneurs and how they created America. And so that's where the term, interestingly, doesn't actually come from. In my vocabulary, I just 3-4 years ago when I was thinking of a podcast, just the name Titans of Today came to my mind. I said, perfect. Let's just roll with that. So
Beautiful. And actually an interesting comparison for some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, because the Titans of the Industrial Revolution, that's the first big technology wave that we experienced. And here we are 100+ years later, going through this amazing new wave of technology, disruptive technology with AI. So we're going to have Titans of AI very soon.
Exactly. And that's why I'm happy to have you here. So you can give us some insight on some of those things. And one way to ask this question that I'm going to ask you here is and this is what you typically hear. People say, what do you think the world's going to look like in 5 years or 10 years? What would you build and things like that? Yet if you were all of a sudden 16 years old again, you have all your knowledge, but you have all your knowledge of how the world is, and you're in 2025 today, and you're there and you have the opportunity to really pick your life. What is it that you focus on? Is it robotics? Is it AI? Is it something totally different? What steps would you take?
I don't think there's a right answer to that. And I don't know what the right answer is because I don't have a crystal ball. But I'll give you one advice that I got when I was 20 and a bit, right? It really shaped how I think about technology and how I can make a big impact with technology. And that is, whenever you see the start of a massive new wave, right? A new sort of cycle with technology, whatever you're doing, you should just jump into it, right? As early as you can. And do that, even if you have to take a bit of a demotion, even if you're going to get paid less, right? Even if it's hard, even if you have to do crazy stuff like relocate to Silicon Valley, I don't know, whatever it is, right? That is the right thing to do with technology. Like when you're in technology, you're really only as relevant as your last big success or the last set of things that you learned, right? And if you're in the know, if you're cutting edge with what you're doing and you're part of a new cycle that's significant, then that's how you make the most impact. And if you stay behind, if you don't jump on new technologies, it's like, oh, I know mobile and cloud. I don't really need to understand AI. That's where things slow down and don't work as well. So if there's any advice that I would give for a 16-year-old now is jump on the latest and greatest. Try all sorts of crazy stuff with agents, MCP, learn all this AI stuff, learn how to prompt, learn how to use these tools, because I believe those are going to be absolutely critical for your professional success.
And in your time as an entrepreneur, what did your days typically look like? How did you fill your time? And then how did you know when it's the right time to delegate and pass things on so that you could stay focused on and really harvesting all the new things that are coming about and applying them versus getting caught in the day-to-day and just operations?
Yeah, I always tend to kind of try to bring in the latest and greatest into my organization and then challenge people inside. Hey, have you thought about this? Did you try this? So I would probably this is mostly at nights because during the day I'm going to build a company, but at nights I would be like, okay, what's going on? Check out YouTube. What are people saying about this thing? Read that stuff. Try to experiment. I'm an engineer by training. I can code. I can figure stuff out, more technical stuff, and then bring that back into my organization and really make sure that you have a group of people that are forward thinking, that are thinking about what's cutting edge. How do we really get ahead of the pack with the kind of technologies that we're building in the company? You want to have that group of people. You want to be able to identify them and say, okay, those are the people that are going to help us march kind of forward to the next interesting technologies. And if you don't have that group of people, then you want to hire those people and you want to foster that mindset of like, how do we think about what's next?
And how big of a catalyst was it for you moving to Silicon Valley in your life?
Yeah, pretty massive. Look, I've been in and out of Silicon Valley in the last 20 years because I've been in startups for my entire career, which is 25 years. So around 2006, 2007, I was already going back and forth. Actually, 2008, 2009, I was managing people in Silicon Valley back from Israel, where I'm from originally. But moving here in 2010 was game changing for my career, for sure. 2010, actually, that entire sort of window from the great financial crisis, GFC, up to 2011, 2012 is what set us up to what happened up until the crazy zero periods of 2020, 2021, right? That's when mobile and cloud were really cemented, right? Back in like after the GFC, we had a great financial crisis. Everybody was like bummed. It sucked. We lost a lot of value. And out of that came this amazing technology wave, mobile and cloud, SaaS, right? Applications, all those different things that have created trillions of dollars in value in our economy and significantly increased our GDP. So for me, I was very lucky this coming to Silicon Valley in 2010, sort of jumping that wave right at the right time. And I'll expand here a little bit because I think it's an interesting story maybe for your listeners. I came to get my MBA, my Master's of Business Administration at Berkeley Haas, which is a pretty good school for that. And when I came in, I was already pretty senior. I was already a head of product at a company called Giga that was Mayfield benchmark first round backed. So well-known quantity in Silicon Valley. So when I started going to school, very quickly, I was connected to a firm, a VC firm on Sandsville called Recursive Ventures. And they hired me as a senior associate because I was up to date, up to speed on everything that happened with social media. And that opened up an entire world of opportunities for me, where I became cutting edge on mobile. We had portfolio companies at Morinter like Evernote, and we had fintech companies like Lending Club in our portfolio. And I was exposed to all that very early, right before the fintech revolution, before mobile really took off. And that helped me, similar to what we talked about in the previous question. I was ahead. I was like jumping on the next wave as early as it started, which really boosted my career in subsequent years.
And how do you continue to harvest and capture value as, let's say, financially as an entrepreneur, or just transacting in the business when you are jumping on those new waves? Because a lot of people might struggle with, they're focusing on one thing and they want to get this thing growing and see it a success. And they fear if they jump on the next wave that they're going to lose where they're at now. So there's that trade up. How do you successfully trade up and compound all those together?
You don't always. Sometimes you take a hit. Sometimes you got to take a step back and say, wow, okay, I'm just throwing a random example here. I'm a VP of product in building a mobile app, but I'll take a pay cut and I'll move to a director position in a leading AI company. But I'm doing that. I'm making that conscious choice, again, to jump on the latest and greatest technology, learn the ropes of what it takes to build a company with this latest technology, with the understanding that short term, I'm going to take a cut, but midterm, I could be making 10x what I'm making today. So it's an investment in yourself, in your ability to really get the most out of it 3, 5, 10 years from now.
It's pursuing the global maximum, not the local maximum.
Correct.
So if you're looking at that graph, if it goes down a little bit, that's okay, but the rate of change increases significantly, and that's how you get to owning and running your own VC fund like where you are today.
And that's right. And it's a hard decision to make, which is why I'm like talking about it, because it's not for everybody. And people don't, especially professionally, a lot of people don't always like to get out of their comfort zone. This is not a comfortable thing to do. Quit your job and go work at an AI company. It's a crazy decision, right? Potentially, but that's what it takes.
So what is some of the internal, external conflict that you overcame throughout your journey? Some of the stories that turned out to be pivotal moments that you followed that continued notion that you're representing?
There's always this great story that I tell everybody about how I came into Life360. So I was a senior associate working at this firm called Moat Ventures, which is a storied VC firm on Sandhill Road. And through that, one of the partners there sourced Life360. And back then, Life360, they were so early, man. They didn't have a lot going. But I did all the diligence work. And I figured that there's something there, right? Like I saw like consumers want this thing. Parents, families, they want a lot of the conversations that parents and families are having are like, where are you? When are you getting here? And this thing, Life360, answers that very basic question in a very efficient way, right, for families. So I was doing diligence. I saw at the top of the funnel, I saw there's demand. But my fellow VCs were very skeptical. Actually, one of the partners at my firm, and I'll never forget that, it's a crazy story, he was very much against the deal. And his point, the reason was, he was saying, this is 2010, he was saying that, hey, like kids are never going to have smartphones. Never.
Wow.
I was like, what? What are you talking about? Everybody smartphone. He was kind of still stuck in the old BlackBerry days or something. At some point, I started working more and more with the founders. I was an advisor to them. And then around 2012, We reconnected and they told me, look, Itamar, we really want you to join as a VP of product. I have tons of experience doing product stuff. I help take the company to the next level and all that. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I'm a VC. I'd like to stay in VC. It's like such a great opportunity, blah, blah. But then I figured I listened to some of my mentors and they told me that to be a really good VC, you have to get one real, like huge win in your track record. So I decided to jump into Life360 and I had the opportunity to buy out a co-founder that wanted to leave. I took all the money I had under my name at that time, everything I had. I borrowed money to buy this guy out. And I spent another 12 years in the company, taking it from seed to an IPO and beyond. And now it's a $5 billion publicly traded company in the NASDAQ.
And how has your life changed since, let's say, that liquidity event? How did your perspective on business or money or really what matters in life into you after that event?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Lots of different changes. So obviously I've learned a lot. It was a crazy journey. And I learned a few things. The first thing that I've learned is that I suck as a CEO, but I'm great at supporting CEOs. That was one insight that led me to go back to venture and do what I do today, which is run a Recursive Ventures. The other thing that I've learned is how important it is in startups to, one, have grit, and two, ride something that has a true moat, right? Like a true differentiation in the market. Because one interesting thing about Life360 is that throughout the journey, we were told no so many times. It's like unbelievable how many people turned us down. I have a running list of 70 VCs on Sand Hill that I know who all said, no, this will never be a big business. And obviously they're all wrong. And what I figured is that if you're right and you stay at it long enough, and look, like Chris Hulls, who's the CEO founder of Life360, he's been running the company since 2007, 18 years in, right? And he proved everybody wrong on the way because they all say no. And so that's a kind of great. But also what he figured is that he is onto something and he has a moat in this business that will help him be ahead of the competition, be ahead of the market, no matter where you're at seed, later on, and even when you're public. Even now when they're public, they're ahead. And that's what ended up in building a great business. So those are two good lessons that I've learned joining the Life360 journey.
And I paused to reflect deeply because we talked about Moat in the first conversation that we had. A lot of people, they say, what's my purpose? Or where's the biggest opportunity? Or how can I make the most money? Seems like the right question should be, where is my moat? Where can I build a moat?
Yeah, I think it's really true because if you don't have a moat, you're just going to have like 20 copycats on your back. Like if you're successful, everybody identifies and sees the success. Like maybe I can pull this off also, like myself, right? And it's just, you learn this in Economy 101, right? Economics 101 is, okay, if there is a lot of supply, then the price goes down and the margins erode and your competitive edge goes away and it becomes a commodity. And we know that commodity businesses are not great businesses to have. But when you have a moat, you can command the price, you can command the margin, and you get outsized returns. So it is a very good question to ask. Actually, about everything, not just about startups. Like even if I was starting a mom and pop bakery on the street corner, I would ask, how do I differentiate this business so that I get so many customers ahead of all the other bakeries around? It's a good question to ask.
Yeah, it applies to a lot of different ways. Differentiating yourself. It could be relationships, it could be business, it could be really just your self-understanding and your discovery about what you're going to do next and what matters to you. Key point for everybody listening there. Now, let's talk more about, have you heard of the Lean AI leaderboard?
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course.
Just making sure.
Eric Ries.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. I know Eric. He's wonderful. It's amazing some of the work that he's done over the years. Yes.
So there was a company that just dropped, he just mentioned it yesterday, I believe it was, GenSpark. Yeah, okay, you're familiar with GenSpark as well.
No, I'm actually not. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So it's essentially they started out with a AI-driven browser, and they got it to about 5 million ARR. And then they realized that essentially their mode was not in having an AI browser. It was turning it into a browser with an AI infrastructure architecture of agents behind it. So Eric had actually posted about it yesterday, and they're now at 25 million ARR, I believe, or in an extremely short period of time, within months. So what is really different about the DNA of these type companies that we're seeing that are coming out? And there's definitely a pattern to a lot of the different ones in the way the product looks, in the way they're using large language models. And I would say even with this one, it's harnessing the most up-to-date features of the models, not just saying, okay, we have generative capacity, but now we have deep research. What else can we do with deep research? Well, now we have these other emerging properties, duration of models being able to complete tasks and whatnot. So in your world as a VC, you probably see many companies. I think what the number was 1,000 a year.
Easy.
Yeah. So what really would stand out to you, and what's different in the DNA of these companies versus the others that we've seen?
Yeah, excellent question. So there's a lot of stuff happening as we speak, and it's wild. So let me try to cover a few different areas here to add up to something that potentially answers your question. So there is this sort of several different trends all coming together at the same time. And they're all adding up to bootstrapping, seed strapping, and hyper growth, right? That we're seeing with things just flying off the shelves like crazy, right? So why is it happening? First of all, it's building up on all the massive distribution, online distribution that has been building up over the last 25 years, right? Since the invention of the internet, mobile, everything is accessible, everything happens really quickly, everything just works, right? So that's one piece of the technology is getting better, making it more accessible to everybody, right? That's one. The second thing that's happening is obviously the speed in which we can build digital products has been significantly accelerated with the introductions of vibe coding type of tools, right? I have portfolio companies, portfolio CTOs calling me up saying, Itamar, we have engineers doing 2-3 times the amount of work that they used to do with tools like Cursor and others. And it's just mind-blowing, right? You just also think about, a lot of people talk about price, like cost, right? Oh, I don't have to hire this engineer, so I'm saving on a salary, I'm saving cost. But not enough people talk about speed. AI produces code instantaneously. You give it instructions, you get code. You want it to run, it runs. If it doesn't run, you need to fix a bug, it fixes the bug straight away, right? So just the speed of shipping things has really, we took it up a notch. And I think we're going to see more of that. Something that would take months to build now takes days, hours potentially. So that's crazy. And that means you can put a much more baked, ready to go, mature product in front of users really quickly. And that obviously increases their conversion and willingness to pay because it's a good product. It's not half-assed. You're not waiting for the next version. It's here and it's doing the work. That's the second thing. The third thing that I think is just more societal, like us, whether it's technology people, tech people, or non-tech people, is that everybody understands that this AI thing is a game changer. So there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of people like jumping in to try these fees, right? I think, and I'm hearing that from a lot of friends doing different types of work is, oh, wow. If I don't jump on the AI wagon, I'm going to be left behind. I'm going to be replaced by a younger kid who knows how to use all these AI tools. I'm going to become irrelevant. And I think those people are right. If they're going to upskill themselves with AI, they're going to have to get reskilled into something else, right? So it's important that people are identifying that. And that pushes, in a good way, people to like, oh, why don't you try this product and that product? Oh, I need to pay $25 to be a better vibe coder. Sure, I'll pay $25. It's not a lot of money. So I think there is a lot of experimentation and early adoption happening with those AI tools. And that leads to that really fast ARR growth. Whether that is sustainable or not is a whole different conversation that we need to have. But it's a question. I think in some cases it's going to be sustainable. In other cases, TBD.
So a good area to focus that question on about the sustainability of it is let's look at Windsurf versus Cursor in terms of the OpenAI acquisition of Windsurf. And I believe that Cursor is much further along, though, in terms of revenue and potentially some other things, custom, or what are they called? Fine-tuned models. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. But now with OpenAI coming in, that's a huge game changer. And so the question that I've heard before is, who will win the IDE wars? Yet, is that even the right question to ask? Because will it just be similar to how it was with previous IDE versus IDE, where it becomes preference and there's slight advantages? Where do you see that convergence point? Or do you think there will be one that will far and away crush, that will dominate the market?
Historically, for specific programming use cases, there has been a few winners take it all in the IDE world. I don't know if we're even going to call this thing IDE in the future. We'll see. But for now, it's an IDE. I think we're in V1 of this thing. It's working, but it's V1. So I don't know yet what V3 looks like, but I think more broadly connecting that to the Moat, and then let's connect that back to the kind of Windsurf cursor story. There's something much bigger and fundamental happening here, which is you have to think about those LLM companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Llama, obviously with open source. They're basically like an operating system. They have building all these applications on top of their services, but they're also very limited as an operating system, because if you think traditionally of something like what Windows did, right? Microsoft Windows did, they created the operating system and the human machine interface. And then on top of that, they took the biggest market that was available, which is the office market, right? Worth hundreds of billions of dollars today. And they nailed it, right? They won it over. And anybody who tried to play in their world, try to build like a big spreadsheet, whatnot, has failed. Oddly, Google took in the cloud as part of it, but that's a different story, and also took 20 years to get there, right? So I think there's a comp here. Like, it's going to potentially look the same. And when you think about something like OpenAI, it's this infrastructure layer, right? This LLM, this operating system, if you will. But then what I think OpenAI and everybody else has figured out over the last year or two is it's not really going to go big unless you start building the applications on top of it. And the applications, they require this fine tuning and this customized user experience for that use case, for that to be really successful and effective for customers. So now going back to Cursor and Windsurf, Cursor is essentially an extension of Anthropic Claude. Anthropic has a competing product, semi-competing product at least, because Anthropic itself has recognized that vibe coding and using LLMs to produce code is probably the most immediately monetizable use case on top of LLMs. It's exactly what it is, right? The LLMs like ChatGPT, which like is a search competitor, Google competitor is one, and that's going really big, we know, and that's great. But the second thing that is now working is this vibe coding thing. I don't know, the latest was what Cursor like crossed $1 billion, I don't know, like significant revenue, hundreds of millions at least. So it became this race where OpenAI, I'm speculating, but OpenAI had to choose between building the best IDE with LLMs to produce code or buying this thing, because this alignment of Cursor Anthropic was getting ahead. So I think, and I did corp dev very extensive at Life360. I would imagine that was what's going through the corp devs people's heads of, oh wow, we're gonna lose the vibe coding wars unless we do this thing. We either buy or build, we might as well buy.
Yeah, it looks to me like the Instagram purchase that Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg made for $1 billion. So obviously to the founder, $1 billion. I think there was two of them. Great exit. I think they had some investors, of course. Yet now look at the value of Instagram and how powerful that ecosystem has become under Facebook. Same with this Windsurf acquisition, $3 billion, phenomenal exit. Very quickly, they did it in a matter of years. And now OpenAI has the power to turn that into incalculable sums.
And look at how Mark Zuckerberg is responding with those crazy bids on Ilya's company and Daniel Gross, both wonderful people, by the way. It's just mind blowing that I think people are going to keep upping the ante here, and from, I don't know how far, but we're in the billions, in the tens of billions. And this could be just the beginning.
Yeah, like with Scale AI, recently the $14 billion, 49%.
Which again, I personally, and this is all speculation, I'm not an insider on any of these, but I perceive as mostly a defensive move, actually. Like, yeah, and I think people now understand that because Scale AI has been significantly discussed in the news. Now people understand that really a lot of the sort of secret sauce of OpenAI was just great labeling. This is not a new thing. We knew that labeling is absolutely critical for AI to work well. And it was there way before we had diffusion models and generative AI. It is old school ML and NLP and computer vision was all very dependent on quality labeling. And that holds true in generative AI as well. So for me, that feels as more of a defensive move than an offensive move. And it's very typical. The bigger your company gets, the more you have to defend, like your existing revenue streams, your position in the market, blah, blah, blah. And that pushes you to make more of these acquisitions to just hold your position, right? Instead of being threatened by incumbents and new entrants. So that's how Cursor AI feels to me. And I agree with you. It feels like what OpenAI was doing with Windsurf as well. They're just trying to hold
hold it down.
Yeah.
Do you think that with the subsidization of AI and compute and everything, that we will see a significant increase in the cost of these services and platforms in the future? Or you think that the scale will perpetuate and they'll continue and just by market forces have to keep their prices relatively low and accessible?
No, I'm a true believer that prices are going to increasingly trend more and more towards zero. Look, we've had several years where the cost of inference has gone down by order of magnitude, like 10x
Hundreds,
cheaper.
yeah. Yeah, even
Now, same time as the prices of both training and inference are going down, we're also using much more compute with some of these applications. And we now know if you use tools like OpenAI Deep Research or Perplexity Pro has some of these features where it's like agents that check and double check and triple check and get more information and to the point that you have a higher quality response on prompts, right? And higher quality processes with agents. What we found is that if you throw a bunch of compute at the problem, you get higher quality responses. No big surprises there. So at the same time, inference costs are going down. We're using more and more compute to drive higher quality responses out of the system. So there's this race on both directions. But I think the ultimate direction is very clear. Cost is going to go down. If you start looking at it from the grounds up, you start with the semiconductor level, right? With the chips. Yes, NVIDIA is 1 to whatever, 5 steps ahead of the competition, if you will. But Intel has good chips and AMD has good chips, and they're all racing to get to the same point. So 5 years from now, a bunch of this is going to be commoditized, potentially, and everything is going to become cheaper because of the competition. The chips are going to become cheaper. The algorithms are going to get better, and everything is going to be more efficient. So I think this is a one-way train to lower costs, and it will just make it better and easier for startups and big companies to leverage this technology.
The relatively infinite ability to expand given innovation versus market forces dominating the whole equation. And I side with you more on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I should mention that really presents an amazing opportunity. I feel like this is a little bit like 1996, 7, 8, right? When I know Cisco was worth $1 trillion or something because they were building the backbone of the internet. And then we figured that this whole backbone, all this infrastructure, we overinvested in it ahead of services and applications that didn't exist, right? Webvan took 20 years to show up in the form of Instacart in my backyard, so in my front door. It then happened back in 99 because all those different things had to happen. But we built the backbone for Webvan and we overinvested. And guess what came out of that? The modern era of the internet, like Google and some of those big players, right, came out of that overinvestment. The same thing is happening now. We have overinvested infrastructure, and now it's a massive enabler for the last mile, the applications at the top of this thing to reap all the rewards. So that's why I'm advocating to investors, like, yeah, why don't you take a little bit of your profits on NVIDIA public stock and actually move to where the money is going to be really made. And that's at the application layer of AI. In that last mile, we're likely be looking at a revolution that would produce trillions of dollars in value.
That's a great point. I never thought about that because I'm 28. So I was 4 or 5 years old when the whole market, the dot-com bubble crashed. And I've always kind of looked at it like that type of experience that type of time is your time to make money. Yet what you just said is really interesting because you're absolutely right. Google came about, 2004? Somewhere right around that time. Facebook, everything massive that we know today, most everything massive that we know today was built out of that. And you also started that out of the great financial crisis. There was also phenomenal things. So I think it's less of this is your time to make money versus there's always times to make money if you're doing and following kind of the path that you said. If you're staying on the cutting edge, you're working towards building something valuable and creating value in the market. I'm enlightened now. So hopefully that's opened some eyes for others as well. And going back to what you mentioned about language models and where it's at today, that if you look at how language models excel with producing great code, and really we seeded that foundation with all the infrastructure investment, and now we're seeing all these applications and things being exploded about. Is there a world where that wasn't the case? Or is the accessibility and how programming is essentially just language, and if you take the large language model and its ability and what we've done, that it naturally would always lead into this versus is there a world where, and we started to see some of these things where science or mathematics there's different sort of models and things that can be developed, like LQNs, if you're familiar with those large quantitative models. Do you believe that this was the absolute must-have natural progression, or was it just built by where the nearest term opportunity is?
No, it's the first inning because of various things. We're going to see all those domino blocks fall one after the other. The question is, where are we going to see them first? What's happening now? What's going to take 5-10 years and what's going to take 50 years? I don't know about the 50 years, but I can talk about what's happening now. So again, we started with this kind of generic use case, almost like a search replacement in the form of ChatGPT. And it is notable to say that this quarter, I think, is the first quarter where Google's share of search queries has dropped below 90%. And guess who's filling in the blank? And I think that's just getting started. But then vibe coding is next. Like we said, that's the first inning of AI. Like, where's the value being created? Vibe coding is next. And I think there's a very natural explanation to that. It's always with technology. It's about the technology, but it's also about technology adoption. And adoption, guess what? It's not necessarily just about technology. It's about humans. So with vibe coding, with coding in general, we've got this almost like perfect storm of, because of the way code is structured, it's actually a very simplistic language in the grand scheme of things, right? There's only so many words. There's only so many combinations, and it's highly structured, right? And it also has inputs and outputs, which you can run through and figure out what this thing does, how it works, can you improve it, and so on and so forth. It's compilable. There's so many characteristics to code that make it easier in the world of LLMs to produce, explore, and correct, improve the quality of code on one hand. On the other hand, the people who are doing the coding are naturally the folks that are adapt the most to new technologies. They're coders. That's what they do, right? They learn new technologies and they implement them. Engineers, computer software engineers, they don't need help crossing the chasm. They're just there, right? So they're the first to jump on it. And on top of that, it's one of the most valuable professions in human society. We've got engineers, like Google is paying engineers $1 million a year to write code. And now this thing can do a significant chunk of that work. So there's so much value. So like easy technology, the technology makes it easy. The folks using it are the best at adopting it. And there's so much value. Perfect storm, hence vibe coding. Now, when you apply that to other fields, it really varies. I actually think I've been seeing over the last few months a few like super interesting next generation AI platforms who replace some of the work that scientists do. And I think that could be the natural next iteration here, because scientists naturally, they do a lot of experimentation, they deal with a lot of data, they process that data, they use statistical models. Those are things that LLMs know how to do well. So I think copilots for scientists is definitely one of the next things that we're going to see here. And so the more structured and the more data there is, the better LLMs are going to be able to help people crunch through that very quickly and make things better. And the more you move into kind of even like more philosophical things or things that require more human intuition, the harder the job gets for LLMs. So those are probably going to be the last. Like I've just had this interesting LinkedIn back and forth with a bunch of folks about, are we going to see the first AI VC, like fully AI, right? The VC is, the AI is just going to make the investment decisions. And I think that would eventually happen for something like late stage VC, where you can crunch all the financial numbers and say, okay, this company is growing this much year over year and this and that, and that's the comps, and that's the multiplier, and you can do the math. But when super early stage venture capital, like what I do, there's so much intuition and pattern recognition, and there's so many nuances talking to founders and getting a good read on, is this person a true founder that can go all the way? I don't think AI is necessarily going to do that very quickly, as an example.
What makes a founder that can go all the way?
Oh, wow. That's an excellent question. And that's what we're all looking for, those unicorn founders who can go all the way. We're talking about a true unicorn in the sense of a person who can just get going, get started with a company of one, and then two, like founders, and have that like the first leg of that journey is so different than what a lot of folks we know in professional settings do day to day. Of all trades on one end, but then you have to become master of all trades as you get bigger and bigger, all the way to an IPO and beyond. So I think you have to fall into that bucket, which again, very few people do. I think you have to have a few characteristics. I think, first of all, you have to be a super charismatic leader. You just have to be somebody that people like a lot, right? Most of the time. The second thing is you have to have significant intellectual curiosity, because the type of challenges that you have running an early stage startup and the type of challenges that you have running a big public company, they vary a lot. So if you're not really in this mindset of, I got to learn this new thing, I got to learn how to manage my board, I got to know how to talk to analysts on Wall Street. And on the flip side, I got to learn how to hack AI and code if I need to myself. That's a wide gamut of so many different skills that you have to. So if you're not really intellectually curious, I think the music is just going to stop at some point for you, and you'll have to move aside, or the company would slow down, or both. And the last thing I'd probably mention is people that think with first principles and also have like intellectual honesty, that can really, and humble, get feedback, learn from the best, internalize, less ego, stick to that North Star of how you interact with people. Your handshake is golden. Some characteristics that really help you have that North Star as a person, as a professional, as a leader of a company. I think you have to have some of those characteristics to be successful and be able to go all the way.
And how important are mentors in that? You mentioned having mentors yourself throughout your journey. How important are mentors, and how can somebody really find great mentors in this type of field, leading technology and tech entrepreneurship?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've already established that on this journey from 0 to a billion or 10 billion, you're going to have to learn so many different things. And luckily, there's people out there who've already seen it and done it, right? And those are the mentors that you need. And as much as self-taught people, there's like amazing self-taught people are like out there. I think even the best self-taught person with the right mentor can go faster, right? So it is absolutely critical to have mentors in areas that you just don't have experience in. Where do you find them? Especially in startups and technology. Typically, they're your angel investors, they're your VCs, right? They're independent board members and advisory boards that you can put together, and people get compensated for this stuff, mostly in equity. And the trick is really to build the right relationship, right? A relationship that fosters, transparency and just a really good conversation about some of the challenges, and obviously trust. I would say I've always had mentors in my career. I was always doing my best to kind of foster the relationship, build the relationship, try to give back to your mentors as well, because they're also humans and they also need stuff like all of us. You really have to have that mindset of, I want to get mentored. I want to invest in mentoring. I want to be open-minded. I want to be humble. And I want to try to learn from people that have been there, done that, right? And if you don't do that, then you are more likely than not to be left behind on your learning journey and learning curve.
And what were some of the ways that you gave back to your mentors? Because let's say there's startup founders who are just starting out in their, what do I have to give to what can I give my mentor when what they're giving to me, it seems so great versus the upside.
Yeah, I'll just mention one. I'm very fortunate to have been mentored into venture capital by a gentleman called Mark Goins. He's one of the best investors in history, actually, very senior executive. And he was my boss like in 2010, so 15 years ago. And we're still in touch today. And just last week, I sent him another deal. He's also an angel investor, saying, hey, I just jumped on this thing. You should come in as well. And he was so thankful that I was keeping him in the loop and making sure that he stays on top of stuff. He does that without me. He doesn't need my help to do that. But if I can do anything to like help him out, I would always do that. Mark is also on the Life360 board. Between me and the CEO of the company, it was really important for us to have the right people there. And Mark has just proven to be an amazing board member for the company. Ever since we took it public in Australia at a $450 million market cap, now at a $5 billion market cap, also NASDAQ traded. Mark has been on that entire journey, and that has been rewarding for him and us. So you want to build long-term relationships and not just also give, not just take from science mentors.
And what does that optimal relationship look like in the sense of when you are receiving and you are on the exploration side or the discovery side of some of these critical challenges you're solving? How can you go about focusing those relationships in the right way and getting the value from that person?
Yeah, I think it's very important to be open and transparent, because if you're trying to guide these mentors to a decision you already have in the back of your head, you're missing the whole point. You really want to have almost like you're preparing a dossier for them. This is like balanced, and here's what other people might think, or what not necessarily jade them, your view of the world. So I think that's an important best practice, to have this balanced approach to having a conversation with mentors. I think it's a lot about being able to accept feedback, which is not always easy to hear, right? And the best mentors are one that give you like direct feedback on what you could have done better, and are very good at delivering that feedback without creating a lot of friction. Because most people, when they get feedback, it's, I don't know, I'm cringe. It's not, you don't like, there's something inherent in us which we like to disagree when we get feedback, right? We like to disagree. So you kind of have to overcome that and be really like genuinely open to the feedback, because it's not like when you're a founder and you're running a company, if you don't internalize the right feedback, you're going to lose. Like the company's going to lose, right? You're going to make mistakes. When you're an employee working in the company and your boss comes to you and you have a review and you get feedback, if you don't follow exactly what they say, most times you won't get fired. Maybe nothing bad is going to happen. But if you're a founder CEO, and you're getting good feedback and you're not internalizing it, everybody in your organization could potentially suffer. So that's why it's so critical to have that kind of open up your antennas and have this kind of mindset of really internalizing feedback.
And where did you learn to be coachable? You mentioned that being an important factor, coachability and being able to take that feedback.
Yeah, it's interesting. For me personally, in my journey, look, I'm originally Israeli, and it's a different culture where we typically tend to be more aggressive and jump ahead of the pack, and do things that don't always are not always very productive in settings where there's multiple decision makers. Like Israelis are really good at taking the ball and running with it, right? And charging ahead. But we're not always good at bringing people along on the journey, which is obviously really important when you're building an organization. So for me, I was very fortunate I feel like we're talking about some of the same people, but they're important people in my life. Chris Hose, the CEO, founder of Life360, at some point in my career at Life360, he insisted that I get coaching, and not just me, actually most of the management team. He was very proactive. We should really update our skills and get better at this as we go along on the journey. And I was first a little bit resistant, but over a period of actually 2 years working with my coach, I learned so much. And it was also very important for me to adopt my mentality to working in fully in the Silicon Valley setting versus working in startups in Israel. It's a different mindset. So that was my opportunity to learn a lot. I'm thankful till today that Chris and Life360 gave me that opportunity.
It was like the knowledge that you had to be transparent was that first step. And when you started to be transparent, then the rest of the coachability and the feedback and the process to receiving that growth, which you needed, came naturally. Because I think as a founder myself, if you have the ability to have a sounding board with somebody who really does have the answers or has been through what you're going through and what you're trying to solve. Like you said, for example, when you were going to a Life360, that you made that decision because it seemed like as well that you had in your mind that you wanted to be a VC, right? And then what you heard that to really be a great VC, you had to be someone who went and experienced the big rides. Back to that point though, that being able to express what you can't normally speak with 99% of the world that hasn't been a founder or hasn't been in your shoes or had the business experience or the business challenges. If you can just lay that all out and be open-minded, that's where your real growth is going to come from, is having the channel and also being transparent to receive the feedback as well.
Man, you nailed it.
Speaking from a founder's pain. So I have this graph here that I want to show you. It is from the recent Future of Work with AI Agents, a study that just came out from Stanford. Because one of the things that you were mentioning brought up some of the things in my mind. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Please do.
Make sure I get this right. There we go. Okay, so you should see these quadrants. Is that coming across on your screen?
It's small, but I can maybe try that and read some of it. Yeah, this is better.
think we can
Awesome.
go. Yeah, we can go. Yeah, perfect. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about here is maybe go one back. So they talk about these quadrants and essentially that 41% or 42% of YC companies are focused in this automation red light zone. So what they did in this study was they interviewed 1,500 workers and they figured out what things people were excited to have automated, how they wanted agents and automation to come into their world, and various other factors that go along with that. And then this green zone, I did see a company that came out with this a tax preparer.
I have one in my portfolio as well.
Yeah. So talk about some of the companies that you've seen. Essentially, one of the big gists of the study, as I mentioned, is that so much of the focus is going in this red light zone where people don't actually want it to be automated versus perhaps some of these more opportunistic, higher value, higher leverage type, and maybe even more easy to be automated. Give a sense of your perspective on why a lot of companies, as 41%, have added up in this red light zone versus is there a burgeoning opportunity coming in with this green light type zone that might not have been tapped as heavily so far?
Yeah. Look, I haven't actually read the study, so this is super interesting, by the way. Thanks for bringing this up. But when I think about the areas where I'm investing in and the companies that I'm seeing in my portfolio that are breaking through, I think many of them are actually in the automation green light zone because of various factors. One is, and I'll give examples of companies as well. One is there is plenty of sort of siloed, verticalized data that you can leverage, right? Whether you do it with LLMs and you feed them the data as tokens, whether you fine tune with the data to create an even better model for the specific task at hand. It's a big part of that. The fact that the data is there, it's available, it can be structured or it can be ingested in an unstructured way in an efficient way, right? To the point that you can create some of these. And when I think about some of my leading companies who are building verticalized agents, companies like Intuigence AI is an example, which builds vertical agents for the energy and specifically today for the oil and gas industry, where you can have, for folks on the field, suddenly they can have the advice of an agent who's a senior mechanical engineer or a senior electrical engineer when they're trying to understand what's going on with their facility, if they're hitting issues, if they have sensors that are indicating that they have bad reads coming out of the various systems that they have in those essentially manufacturing facilities for oil and gas and refineries. That is, I see here on the chart, is mechanical engineering, right? They can really effectively learn how to read and interpret reports and data and provide valuable advice, right? That's one example. Or as I think about the portfolio company I mentioned, Afternoon, which does accounting and tax preparation, mostly for e-commerce companies, right? E-commerce companies have a specific challenge in their universe where if you're selling across all 50 states, then you have to, at a certain threshold, you've got to file for taxes for the sales that you're making online in those different states. And that's a lot of work. And accountants hate doing it. I have to now take all your sales and split them by state and understand what the various rules are. It's a lot of work. That's again in this green zone of tax preparation, all that. And that is doable because each state has this, it's a book, right? But they have the set of rules of everything that needs to happen. You have all the data of all the transactions that this e-commerce customer did, and that's it. You're off to the races. You can build an effective automation, right? That's kind of me thinking about the green zone. If you go further down to the red zone, and I think what you're saying is, what the point of this study is that there is a lot of companies, I think, trying to address the red zone, but it's a red light zone, but it's pretty hard to make that happen. Is that really the point that they were trying to make in this?
The red light zone is a combination of difficulty and also value. So
Right.
something could be easy, but if it's really low value and people don't want, that was the other unique variable in here, is this something that those people want to have automated? Because you talked about with LLMs and things like Cursor and whatnot, where the target market is the heaviest adopters of this sort of technology. So distribution happens extremely quickly versus if you want to go sell a logistics analyst agent or something like that to a logistics analyst, they might not even want their job to be automated. So it takes into effect the human factor as well.
Look, let's just put it out there. Most people don't want their job automated. Some are like, oh, it's great if I can do less of this stuff. But then obviously the next thing is, oh my God, AI took my job. And that's absolutely going through people's heads. We have to acknowledge it. We have to acknowledge that there's going to be a massive push to reskill our society and us as workers. If we don't, and I actually I don't have a significant voice, but with the little voice that I do have on LinkedIn and other social channels, I call out people like Sam Altman for saying, "Oh no, nobody's going to lose their jobs." Come on, dude. That's not true. We might as well, as a society, prepare ourselves to doing that significant reskilling and like putting folks in places where they can still make a significant impact. So I think specifically for this automation red light zone, it's just the way capital works. Like capital is going to funnel itself to where the biggest opportunity is. So just one random example. Why did SaaS not go well in China? It went so well in the US. Everybody was buying all these SaaS things in the US, and then China SaaS like barely exists. Here's why. Because in the US, if you hire a person, you pay them $150,000, $200,000 a year to do a white collar job. And suddenly a piece of software shows up and for 20 grand a year makes that person 50% more productive. You're like, hell yeah, I'll do that. I get ROI on that. In China, when you sell to a business that pays people $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year, and you charge to send them a piece of software that makes their employees more productive for $20,000, they're like, why? We'll just hire another person.
Yeah,
It's so cheap.
right.
So the same rule applies here in this red light zone of, and the cost of building an inference in AI is still high, right? So if you both have lower paid jobs that you're trying to augment or replace with AI, right? And at the same time, AI is not that cheap. And we see that 80% of POCs in the enterprise in AI fail. So it's hard to implement and embed this technology in our lives today. It's going to take a while for people to really adopt this. Then you have low financial incentives to make it work. Yeah, it goes to the red zone, right? That's what's going to happen. So I think that's part of it. And what could be a second part of it is, again, if you don't have the playbooks, if you don't have the data, if you don't have all these underpinnings to make AI work, if you haven't figured out the right UX to do a human in the loop, like when would a human intervene and direct the machine, direct the agent to the right place, you don't have that user experience, you don't know how to do that well, then hell yeah, it's going to be hard to get these things done. And I think that's also potentially one of the characteristics of solutions in this kind of red light zone.
So a question that emerges from that and follows some earlier threads is when you see adoption, and I was really surprised by this. I was at the gym maybe 2 weeks ago, and they always have the news out middle of the day. And the headline was Enterprise AI Boom. And I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that now that it's on the news. They always say that if your cab driver is telling you this, it's slightly different, but just shocked me because my mindset was potentially still, of course, immersed in the real world of what's going on. But it just really surprised me to see that being on the news and you saying that 80% of POCs fail. And now the question here is, if we look at the successful adoption curve in the market and where adoption is really hitting, where in your experience are you seeing the greatest changes on an industry-wide level, or even on a company size level, if that is even more relevant?
Well, I think we talked about some, but let's deepen that conversation and add a few more verticals and use cases where we're seeing adoption. And I would still caveat and say that a lot of things are still early. So we've talked about vibe coding. We've obviously seen significant progress in customer support, especially for lower tier, more simplistic tickets in customer support. There's definitely automation that could be done there. It is working to some extent, but it's not perfect. And the reason it's not perfect is that when you look at every customer support organization, they have a written or unwritten playbook, and the AI has to learn all that and has to understand. And it needs to learn through all these exceptions and edge cases, which is obviously canvas of in every business, to be able to really take on a significant chunk of the work. So we're definitely seeing that. Related to vibe coding, we are seeing a lot going on in quality assurance, so QA, which is part of development, but there's also an extension of that. So we're seeing a lot of tools that almost like in real time can heal software, like self-healing software, right? Okay, I got this code running in production, bam, a user hits an error, it's not working. You could almost like in real time see that error is happening and then fix it and deploy it so that the user presses refresh and the thing just works now out of the box, right? So we're seeing more and more technologies of that driving quality in digital systems. That's definitely one area there. Then we are seeing more and more adoption across what is RPM, RPA, like automation in general. Think about like internal Zapier sort of killers, stuff that knows how to take data from one system, let's say a CRM system, and moving it to a different system, right? Transforming data in the process with intelligence so that you are actually doing it in a very effective way. So I think we're seeing that inside organizations as well. And that's interesting. Those are some of the things that come to mind. Actually, I have a deck about this that I can pull up if you give me a second. Maybe we jump into another question.
Yeah, for sure. So an
And then,
offshoot of that is, feel free to take your time. An offshoot of that is, so it seems that, like you've said, we are still so early when it comes to true industry level transformation. There's automation, there's different use cases, but true industry level transformation is yet to come.
absolutely. I think we're in the first inning of this thing. There's a lot of work to do. The work is not just in technology, it's also in our brains, like in people's heads, adopting this technology, finding the right paradigms, the right user experiences to make this accessible and usable for humans. It's not trivial at all, right? It's not something that happens overnight because these are processes, takes us a lot of time to discover how to leverage these technologies. And just to give an example, I don't believe that the chat interface that we know so well now from ChatGPT is going to be the ultimate interface for a lot of these applications. It's probably going to be some hybrid of a graphical user interface with chat or with all sorts of different ways to input data, toggles, whatnot, that would actually be effective for different use cases. And we're very early in seeing some of that. So I think those are natural requirements to AI being adopted. And I'm just pulling up, I just saw
Something more Jarvis-like.
what?
Something more Jarvis-like, like from Iron Man. For example, if you're using a chat interface, it's great because you get the text and your mind processes that pretty quickly. And then if you're using voice, so voice mode on ChatGPT, for example, you're not actually getting the text. So you're lowering the bandwidth, which the information is coming into your brain, and it's a little bit harder to organize and utilize. So something more Jarvis-like where it's both even visual things come into play. And that would take probably a continued acceleration and innovation level of the models, which will allow them to produce that information more quickly and from various inputs.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to imagine because it's the future and we don't have a crystal ball. But I do believe that, again, that chat interface is not necessarily the most effective interface for a lot of human machine interactions. So interfaces will have to evolve. And similar to what we said about working with agents, like where does the agent stop? How does the agent provide you information at the point of decision so you as a human can chime in and basically point the agent in the right direction? Some of those questions are really, they're TBD. We don't know. And the thing about human machine interaction, which is dicey, is that you don't know how much time it's going to take to figure it out because it's a spark, right? Somebody just wakes up one day and says, oh, this is exactly how this thing should look so humans can engage with it best. Sometimes it takes a week, sometimes it takes a year. Nobody knows. So we're on that journey.
Are you going to pull up the slides that you were thinking about?
No, I'm still looking for it. If you give me a second, I will.
Yep.
Okay, there you go. Share. Presentation. Yes. I don't know what's the presentation. I'll just share my screen. Oh yeah. So this is a little bit of an older deck that I did. It talks about AI adoption in general. So it's a little bit older. It's 2024, but you can see some of the common AI use case adoptions that we talked about. We got customer service and support, which I mentioned here. We have cybersecurity and fraud management. There's like a lot of logs out there for cybersecurity and fraud. And sometimes there's unstructured data and that AI is particularly good at working for that unstructured data and getting signals out of it. Coding agents, we've already talked about. That's vibe coding, all that is probably down to one. When I did this in 2024, it wasn't that big. It was just on the rise. Digital personal assistants. Oh man, I've seen 10 companies pitch me with the best executive assistant for Itamar. It's like in the form of AI. So there's a bunch of that. Obviously, marketing and content generation. We've seen this massive wave. This thing can generate content very well. It can get better at generating content when you give it more content. I'll just give you an example. A lot of the content that I do these days on LinkedIn those are my ideas and my thoughts, but then I heavily rely on projects with Claude to make some of those posts. And the way I do it is I actually put in all my previous posts, and I also put in all the key analytics metrics that LinkedIn provides on like how many views, how many comments, how many likes. And then when I asked the AI to help me write my next post, which it only gives me the first version, I then edited myself heavily. So it is human, and you can tell the difference. Yes.
No M dashes.
Exactly. Exactly. Find one in my posts.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to. I actually tell Claude to use the style and approach that has worked best based on the analytics, based on the engagement that actually happened out there. And I see it over time producing better and more engaging posts. So you can teach this thing to write better content and do better marketing, which is great. And there's a few other interesting areas here, which also seem to work. And that's why even as late as early as like mid 2024, I was already making the claim that verticalized AI is starting to work, but it's still a long journey, and some classic examples here of stuff that people can see online and working very well.
Some tweets from way back.
Oh yeah. This is
2017. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. Obviously he's with OpenAI now or even beyond that, but this is in 2017. Andres already said that this thing can write code better than him or better than the guy that
Right.
recycled writing code back.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's very interesting to see. And I like the part about the metrics. I didn't think about that. Adding, because of course, it's totally logical now that I hear it. Having those metrics and really the output goal adds a lot of dimension to what the model can do.
Absolutely. There are so many startups that I'm seeing now that are doing that proactively. It's like helping the machine learn what is the best content / campaigns by funneling all the data and analytics. And then your next campaign, it just gets better and better. I'm seeing it I have an unannounced investment in that space that I'll be able to talk about in a month or two that it does exactly that. It basically takes content and has all the analytics, and it just gets better and better.
Brilliant. So let's say you were building one of these high-tech companies. What would your distribution playbook be for a B2B business?
Yeah.
Given the advances of AI and where sales is at today, sales and marketing.
That's a great question. It really depends on what type of product you're selling and what you're building. So a lot of the kind of enterprise products, whether they're AI or not, are still very much inside sale, top-down sell motions, right? I'm going to go to the CTO or the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, if you're doing cyber, and kind of find ways to entice them to buy this product for the entire organization. That for enterprise still seems to be the king in most cases. Then on the flip side of that, it's like almost the exact opposite. You've got PLG, which is not a new thing. We've all learned about that in the SaaS era. Companies like Slack and others that were able to rise from the bottom up and start with individual end users and then conquer an entire organization, PLG. So I think PLG in the era of AI is actually amplified. I think PLG is increasingly the key to building AI enterprise products. You want to start with the users. They got to love you, build something that they love, and they will bring you into the organization and they will adopt you organization-wide over time if you're doing the right thing. Another sort of interesting characteristics of that is in the era of SaaS, a lot of the pricing was really seat-based. You have a user, you pay, easy. If the user uses it 5 hours a day, or if they use it 0 hours a day, 0 minutes a day, you pay the same, which is a little bit ridiculous. And with AI, because of the cost structure, we're moving increasingly into consumption-based pricing models and usage, right? Usage and consumption. And I think eventually we're going to go from usage and consumption to value-based pricing, which is even more insane and very hard to capture. But that's eventually where it's going to go because it's the best thing for both the buyers and the sellers. So that actually, I think, helps push forward this motion of PLG, because if end users really love you and use you and consume your services more, then you can charge more, right? You create more value. And it's going to be easier for the organization to buy this product that's being heavily used versus some top-down thing that nobody uses and we keep paying for and nobody knows why. So I think that's one characteristic around go-to-market pricing. They're related that we're seeing here in this sort of age of AI.
You mentioned the impressive hyper-growth distribution architecture that we've developed over the last 20 years or so. You mentioned that earlier. And it feels like that top-down motion is just so heavy with friction versus that bottom-up. Yet, as you're saying, it is a necessary evil still to this point.
Yeah, I think it is for certain type of products, but increasingly, again, PLG and adopting the services from the bottoms up is increasingly the choice. And I think if you're a top-down B2B product, you're more ripe for disruption by new entrants into the category that start with raving fans actually that are using this inside of their organization. You're going to be able to replace some of those top-down solutions. So that is an opportunity and also a risk, right? Another thing that I would mention if we're talking about distribution is open source. And open source is not new. It's been around there forever. I've been back in enterprise versions of open source products for a while now, and it hasn't been super easy, but it's been working, right? So I think, especially with solutions that address developers and data scientists and people in technology, we're seeing a big push for the open source. Part of it is just culture. That's what people want to see. Part of it goes back to this usage and, I can just check it out. I can just try it, right? With the open source and I can contribute to that. I can tap in the community, a reliable community that I trust and does a good job. I want to be part of this, right? Versus is this just being forced down my throat from my CTO kind of thing? So I think that's part of it. If you can create a bunch of raving fans on your project because you open source pieces of it and people like it and they're contributing and they're becoming basically advocates of this technology, I think that could be a huge win for a PLG type of growth.
And if you combine a solid moat with building raving fans, you're going to have a great company.
That's the goal.
So let's say it's 2030 and we're coming back. We're doing another episode together. What is the one thing that, if it was true, would mean that you've had as much success as you wanted to have over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I'm going to jump into something a little bit different that I'm increasingly believe in, and that's the service as a software motion. I think I'm not the only guy that's talking about this, but I've been talking about it for several years now. And that is that we're now moving from this world where we are helping people adopt technologies to a world where we're delivering end-to-end services and solutions for people using AI. And what that means is that software and AI specifically, which it's fair to say that AI is eating software as well, is basically taking on a completely new types of businesses they could have been taking before. As an example, services businesses, which is a huge part of our economy, trillions of dollars in accounting, legal, tax, consulting, IT, cybersecurity, so many different areas where we get white collar type of services, right, are all really ripe for disruption with AI to a certain degree, right? So what I'm seeing now also in my portfolio is that some of the most successful, fastest growing companies employ that same model. Companies like AI, which is the best and cheapest legal services for startups, right? They do the same quality of service that you get from a big law firm for 80% cheaper, right? And you can still get a person on the phone to call up and ask any question that you have about whatever red line or whatever thing that happened. But the whole thing is driven by AI and so much more efficient, so much cheaper and faster. So that's one example. Or Afternoon, which I mentioned, using AI to automate your bookkeeping and your taxes. Wow, you had to have an army of accountants to do that before. And suddenly one accountant with a very smart AI can manage 100 customers versus 20 back in the day. So I think basically what I'm saying here is we have a thesis in venture capital. We have a thesis in Silicon Valley that if that thesis works, I think technology, AI, and VCs and startups are going to have another sort of order of magnitude leap in terms of how much value we create. And that is the following thesis. Can we take a services business that has a 10, 15, 20% operating margin, and with AI, turn it into 50+% terminal operating margin business, similar to what we see with technology companies. Can that magic happen? Is it going to take a year? Is it going to take 10? Is it ever going to get there? And that's one of the big bets that me and other folks in Silicon Valley are making today, that it is possible. And yes, it's a bet. Yes, it's a thesis. We haven't proven it yet. But if it does work by 2030, we are going to see massive reskilling and displacement of white collar jobs. We're going to see tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in value companies being created, new companies that we've never seen before, right? That replace the traditional services businesses that we know. We write almost how they think about the world. And if that happens, we're going to go through probably one of the biggest and most disruptive waves we've seen in technology since the Industrial Revolution.
Powerful words. As a follow-on to that, would you say that with the massive reskilling and redistribution of people, that might lead to really big challenges? And I do want to greatly appreciate the honesty and the clarity of that thesis, because it's saying the words that a lot of people don't want to say, but that are the probabilistically true, right? We're trending towards that happening, and we're seeing evidence of it every day. And how do you believe that AI might handle that, or how we as a culture would handle that in such a short period of time?
Yeah, I think it's a big issue, and we should be talking about this more. And again, when I see Sam Altman testifying before Congress saying that, no, people are not going to lose their job, I kind of want to smack him over the head and say, what the hell? You're doing that to the benefit of your company, but you're not thinking about society here. As a society, I truly believe that we should be ahead of this, because it's not just that this AI is going to replace a lot of jobs. It's actually happening at record speed that we're not used to seeing as humans, right? Every technology cycle, every adoption of a new technology has become faster and faster over history. This one is going to be the fastest. It's going to happen faster than you're going to blink and suddenly this new thing comes out. So I think if we don't prepare, and I don't want to sound like a doomsday kind of person, I think humans are highly flexible, adaptable. We figure stuff out as we go. And I think we're going to be successful doing this as well. But putting our head in the sand is not going to help. That's not going to help. Getting ahead of it will, which means that how do we think about this world where, again, significant number of jobs are being automated? Obviously, things like autonomous driving, we're not going to have that many drivers anymore, right? It's not going to be the same. And we talked about this white collar job. No, some of them, even now today, a bunch of my companies are refraining from hiring engineers because, again, they're 2-3xing like their existing workforce in engineering, and they're delivering just as quickly, if not faster, right? So this is reality, and we should face it as a society before stuff starts breaking. And what does that mean? It means that we should educate, we should train people on AI so that they can keep their job and be even more productive. One, it means that we have to actually actively think as a society about those specific jobs that are going to disappear. And we have to take those people, we got to reskill them for the different job, right? What can they do given the skills that they have that with certain reskilling can make them very effective and productive in this new line of jobs, right? That's 2. And 3, we got to create a safety net as a society to help those people walk through that chasm, right? Cross that chasm of reskill, adoption, career change, whatever it is. And if we don't do those things, we could end up with a bunch of very distressed people who no longer, forget about money for a second. Those people are not making the same impact on society and on their communities as they used to have. And we know that's bad. We know that's going to end up with some very depressed people who are not being productive. And that is bad for their health, right? And it's bad for us as a society. So the more we get ahead of this, the more we are transparent as a society about what we need to do and what we need to enable, the better we're going to work through that transformation, which is bound to happen. It's just a matter of time. And that's why, again, I'm going full circle back to the beginning. When Sam Altman stands there testifying before Congress that we're going to be A-OK, I'm furious. I think he is distracting us from the important stuff that we need to do as a society and as a country.
definitely. Have you ever heard of the story of Aristotle Onassis?
No.
This is right after World War II. And Aristotle Onassis, he dated a very famous woman. I can't remember her name at the moment, but she was extremely famous. And so right after the end of World War II, there wasn't a lot of shipping going on, and people thought that globalization wasn't going to occur. Nobody really even knew what that was at that point, right? It was now that we have the machines and the technology to send people all over the world, and we've done it for war, it became a reality that we could do that for sending goods and services and other things like that around. And so Aristotle Onassis, at this time, shipping was basically trounced as an industry. And there was tons and tons of ships, right? Supply and demand, you talk about that. And he had the foresight to say, there is going to be tons and tons of shipping. So he rallied as much capital as he could, and he went and bought massive amounts of ships, and he became one of the richest men on the planet for a period of time during that resurgence and the spread of globalization. And it goes back to one of the conversation, or a bit of the conversation we had earlier, where we talk about how, let's say all of a sudden, software is becoming much cheaper, it's easier to develop, it's faster, we're putting it in the hands of more people. I would even say within the next few years, most anybody that's dedicated enough and really driven enough will be able to go into one of these vibe coding platforms and build workable software, because it is still work right now. Definitely still.
Look, I took my website and I asked Lovable to like translate it to copy it, and it just did that. And I don't know how to build websites anymore, so that it's so easy, right? Anybody can do it. But please go on.
Yes, exactly. So then as we continue to extrapolate that over the next few years, it will become even more accessible, and different features will be able to be built that were once complex. And it would seem that the way I see it, robotics and physical real world assets, and to add to this, manual labor, potentially. We'll see how much automation does come into place in manufacturing and whatnot. But when we talk about the reskilling, I think that's something that's probably not talked about, that there will be lots of people who will go into doing manual labor or things that they never thought they would have to do. Right? Because if we're moving towards that physical reality, unless, of course, again, robotics and manufacturing automation becomes so advanced that the physical labor even becomes
I'm
relevant.
more of the optimist. So I'm absolutely, to caveat what I said earlier, I think this technology is going to be magnificent. I think it's going to be amazing. I think it's going to raise GDP and productivity to levels that we've not seen before. And I think that would make room for a lot of good things in our world and in our lives. It will. It's really good. What I'm concerned about is the people that are going to be left behind. And we already have this problem in the US. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there's 15, 20,000 homeless people here, which we've forsaken. We've left them behind in society. What I'm concerned about is the next 100,000 or next 50 million that we're going to leave behind. While this technology makes our lives better across the board, those two things can exist at the same time. And that's what I'm worried about. But overall, if you look at the grand scheme of things, absolutely. This is an amazing technology. It's going to significantly increase productivity. It's going to likely result in us having much more available time to do the things that we love doing, like spending time with our families and friends, and to be much more productive and effective at work with a much potentially shorter workday. And it's going to help us focus on the things that really require human discretion and human skills that AI doesn't have. So maybe more of the things that we love to do versus the grind work that everybody hates. I think that's really, it's going to happen, and it's big, and it's going to be very positive. The only question I keep asking is, how do we make sure we don't let some people down along on that journey? How do we make sure we bring everybody along as a society? And look, I'm not a communist. I'm like a raving capitalist. I'm just like, the reality is, when we leave those people behind, we get what we get in the financial district of San Francisco.
And so do you think that's a UBI? Or
UBI,
universal basic income? Or do you have any thoughts or answers to what that question might?
I think we're already there to some degree, but just giving the money away is not the right answer, because that only solves half the problem of making sure people can buy food if they have their head senses around them. But it's only half the problem. When we give them money, we only solve half the problem. The other problem that we need to solve, and I don't want to go into homelessness in San Francisco and throughout major U.S. cities, even though I think it's a major problem and more people should be talking about it, is that we're not helping those people rise out of the situation that they're at. We're not dealing with their psychological issues. We're not dealing with their drug addiction issues. We're not giving them the opportunity to break out of the situation that they're at, throwing money at them is not necessarily the issue. And I think this is the same thing. Obviously, we're not talking about homeless people. We're talking about people that need to be reskilled, adopting new jobs. But it's the same idea of we're just going to give them money for universal basic income. I don't think that's going to make them happy. I don't think that's going to make them productive. I don't think that's going to make them feel like they're making an impact on their society. And that's the main question that we should answer, not like giving them $2,000 a month.
Great. I like that. So what about the answer to that question? Is there any, do you have any inclination of where people could find purpose if they were displaced and reskilled?
Yeah.
And
So
does everyone just
look,
become digital creators?
there's two ways to approach that. One is, okay, we need the government. And the libertarians are not going to like it, but that's one solution. I'm not going to even say what I believe or what I lean toward. I'm just like giving the option, right? So this is a government countrywide issue or worldwide issue, and we need to spend money for the government to solve the problem, build organizations that help people teach AI, reskill, learn new skills, get new jobs, right? That's one way of approaching it, which traditionally has been the best approach, or like the one that most societies took. And it doesn't mean that we're a communist country. It just means that we're spending money to solve this problem as a society through the government, right? The second thing is through capitalism. Like capitalism can solve it, but that's where I think we have to figure out what the right approach is, the capitalist approach. I'll just give you a crazy example. I'm not even saying that's genuinely doable, but let's just run with our thoughts here, right? A little bit. What if there was an organization that could invest ahead of time in helping people build new skills, right? Or find new jobs that are less susceptible to AI replacing them. And those companies invest ahead in training and educating those people. And then they get a portion of their future revenues, future income, right, of those people. And obviously a crazy idea. Some people have tried it in Silicon Valley. I think Peter Thiel did it and some other people, and it's an experiment, right? But that's like fresh capitalistic thinking that could be successful because you're aligning incentives and you're driving results.
Yeah. And if you can sometimes work from the end in mind versus dealing with the present reality to try to wrestle it into where it might go. I think that working from, let's say we have tremendous abundance that's created, there's great amounts of resources, there's these things that are in order. Then what does the optimal world look like?
Yeah.
We're going to have to all, as a society and as a community, work on answering those questions after we get to the other side of this massive boom that's going on in AI.
Spot on. And if we don't, things will deteriorate. And we're anyway living in a very fragile world. Let's look at how many wars we have going on. Just look at the kind of more extreme culture and society that we live in. This thing is just, AI just has the potential to put more gas into this fire. So like, I do feel this is a good time to stop, reflect, and figure out how we can slightly change course here to make sure that we don't make things worse for us.
It's been great to think through some of these things here with you today, Itamar. What is the final word that you'd like to leave our guests with as they return back into their lives, whether they're building new companies or figuring out if they need to reskill and keep learning?
I just say, I think I've already said before, but I think the disruptive wave we're seeing now with AI is unprecedented. This is probably bigger than the invention of the personal computer. So it's nothing that we've seen before. This is mind blowing. And we're in the first inning. So the best thing you can do is just jump on this train as quickly as you can, as fast as you can, and make the most out of it. It will help you personally. It will help us as a society. We should embrace it. I don't think we should regulate it. So in that sense, I am more libertarian. I don't think the government would know what to do with this. I think the people will. And it starts with you, the listener, of what can I do today to make myself and my organization more efficient with AI? The people and organizations that are going to think through that lens first, they're going to be the ones that are going to succeed in the next cycle that's just upon us. So it's a generic advice, I know, but I believe it's true.
Great wisdom. Thanks again, Itamar, for being on the show. We'll make sure to include some links to your LinkedIn and to Recursive Ventures below. And we'll be back, everybody, for episode 60 coming up next.
Exciting. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jake. I've really enjoyed this one.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights, which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.